Okay, I'm about to get started. Let me get settled. We can start. This does not preclude our asking whether Luke has faithfully represented this or that event, but it does suggest that our primary interest in Luke's narrative should lie elsewhere. This is because the most important aspect of Luke's enterprise lies outside the realm of verification and proof. This most important aspect is his claim to provide a divine perspective on the events he records, his claim that what has happened in the early Christian mission has been empowered by the Holy Spirit and guided by God, and thus gives expression to the ancient redemptive purpose of God. The events he recounts have been strung together in the net of divine causation, so that Luke's claim to faithfulness must be measured first and foremost not on the grounds of historical veracity, but on the capacity of his narrative to represent God's viewpoint on these events. Let me fix this camera. Whoa. I want to press that button. This is not to suggest or even allow that Acts lacks faithfulness to historical events in the mid-first century, nor is it to urge that Acts should be sheltered from historical inquiry. It is rather to refocus the aim of such inquiry. First, typically the contribution of the historian comes in two activities: the selection of events to recount and the ordering of those events in a coherent narrative. This means that on matters of detail and with regard to individual episodes, we can expect Luke's activity to have focused on visiting sites and collecting and checking reports. This is inherent to the ancient historian's task. Second, in relation to Luke's historicism, historical veracity cannot bypass the question of divine purpose, and what really happened cannot be understood apart from God's perspective. To neglect the divine point of view in the historical narrative, like Acts, is to consider less than the full historical truth. Undoubtedly, the history of the earliest Christian movement might have been told differently by different historians with different interests. Other histories might have been formulated, focusing less on Jerusalem and Rome, more on Antioch or Galilee or Philippi, for example. Why does Peter disappear in the second half of Acts? What stories might have been told about him had Luke not focused the spotlight so narrowly upon his only mission? Alternatively, by using only the accounts Luke has given us, other narrators might have constructed a narrative of an altogether different sort, designed to give a comparatively novel perspective on the unfolding of events following Jesus' death and resurrection. Indeed, we can be sure that the Jewish leadership in Jerusalem did share a different interpretation of the events, and Luke himself must have written his narrative as he has in order to shape his readers' views of the significance of the events that have been fulfilled among us. In the first century, there must have existed many diverse and competing ways of construing the progress of the early Christian movement, some that endowed it with no importance at all, others that emphasized more the roles of women like Mary Magdalene and Priscilla and so on. What must be of particular interest to us, then, is that the picture provided by Acts coheres generally with the New Testament witness as a whole. Acts supports this overall New Testament emphasis as the identification of Jesus of Nazareth with the exalted Lord, the continuity between the message of Jesus and that of the early church, and the portrait of the early church as a missionary movement concerned with how the gospel took root and flourished in increasingly Gentile and urban arenas. This view of the historiographical task is less interested in whether other ways of telling the story might have been imagined, for this should go without saying. Of greater interest is how history has been represented by Luke in his second volume. 9.3. The narrative progression of the mission acts. Perhaps the single most important clue for how history has been represented by Luke in his second volume comes in his opening chapter in Jesus' words to his followers. You will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in all Judea and Samaria, and to the end of the earth. Coming in response to the query of his disciples, these words of Jesus substitute a missionary program for their speculation about the timing and substance of end-time events, just as God knows the times and seasons of the fulfillment of his purpose. So he anoints these followers with the Spirit so that they might operate as agents on his behalf, in a statement that will prove to be programmatic for the rest of Luke's narrative. Jesus first sets the future of Israel within the now more widely defined plan of God. Jesus' references to a mission Jerusalem, Judea, for instance, the land of the Jews, and Samaria represent significant progress in this direction and portend the development of the mission in Acts chapter 2, verses 2 through 8. They also give a centrifugal shape to the mission that is quite remarkable. Although the idea of a universal mission is not unprecedented in Israel's history, analogous end-time scenarios typically showed the nations coming to Israel to Jerusalem. Jesus' missionary instructions thus fly in the face of the generally acknowledged holiness of the temple and its status as a location of God's presence. The boundaries to be crossed by this mission are deeply rooted in Israel's self-identity, so that the mission mandated for Jesus' followers calls for transformation of conventional ideas about the way God made the world, the way the world is. But in evangelizing the poor, that is, in proclaiming good news to those of low social status, women, Samaritans, toll collectors, and the like, Jesus had already set in motion this world-transforming, revolutionary mission. Beyond Samaria, the Spirit-endowed mission was to continue to the end of the earth. Where is the end? Ancient geographers spoke of places like Ethiopia and Spain as the end of the earth, but these make little sense of the Lucan narrative. The first key for understanding this phrase in Acts is a recollection that space is never measured in purely geographical terms, but is always imbued with symbolic power. Geography is not a naive given container, but it reflects and configures people's social world. New York, San Francisco, or South Africa, these are more than places on a map. Their social significance extends far beyond a location, so many degrees in latitude and longitude. They, like Jerusalem and Samaria, bring to mind powerful social forces viewed positively by some, negatively by others. The second key comes in Acts chapter 13, verse 47, where the phrase "the end of the earth" is again found, but with the sense more transparent everywhere. oh God, among all peoples, across our boundaries. Luke thus encourages an identification of the end of the earth with a mission across all boundaries and inclusive of all peoples, Jewish and Gentile. In only a very limited sense, then, might one take chapter 1 verse 8 as a diagram of Acts. Much more significant is the way it identifies God's aim within the narrative. Acts chapter 1 verse 8 then is not an outline of Acts, but neither is it a prophecy of what is to come. Rather, it is a missionary portfolio, a job description, an evaluation instrument for Jesus' followers who are to work as their empowered Holy Spirit. As Jesus' words in Acts chapter 1 verse 8 clarify God's purpose. No, let me read that again. As Jesus' words in Acts chapter 1 verse 8 clarify God's purpose. Clarify God's purpose one time. Okay. They also provide a measure by which to ascertain who in the narrative is faithfully serving the word of God. Those who obey the missionary agenda provided here are shown to be operating under the guidance and power of the Spirit to be following God's plan. They are authentic witnesses. If we paint with a large brush, we can portray the advancement of the narrative of Acts in 5 major sections. 9.3.1. The brevity of this section may mask the pivotal role it plays as the hinge between the Gospel of Luke and the Book of Acts. In tying together these two volumes, the opening of Acts provides a sense of continuity between the story of Jesus and the story of the early church, verifying that all is progressing according to the purpose of God. It is easy to come away from our reading of this section with the best of Luke is trying, at least in part, to rest upon coherence and God's salvific design. Just as the ministry of Jesus was firmly rooted in the story of God's salvation in Israel's scriptures, by the opening of the Gospel of Luke, so these opening verses of Acts firmly root the story of the early church and the story of Jesus. According to the opening verses of Acts, Jesus' ministry is unquestionably and foundational to the unfolding narrative of Acts. This is particularly true with respect to Jesus' preparation of his disciples through continuous instruction, the continuing role of the Spirit, who anointed Jesus, through whom Jesus carried on his ministry, and who will now empower Jesus' followers in their capacity as his witnesses. The continuing principal rule, the imperial rule of God, was alternative vision of the world in transit social order, together with the continuing division of Israel and the vision across all boundaries. Along with us reading the beginning of Acts and the Gospel's account of Jesus' ministry and the ongoing self of God's redemptive purpose, the opening of Acts also begins to show the disciples and more active role in the Gospel and portends the ongoing orientation toward God's purpose. This latter point is signified by the references in the continued prayer and appeal to the scriptures in the matter of Judas' replacement. Replacing Judas to bring the number of apostles to 12 is significant in suggesting the centrality of the restoration of Israel, the 12 tribes in Lucan thought. Of course, the amount of space towards the story of Judas also serves as a warning that even insiders among people are susceptible to some of their commitment. Other motives are signaled here at the outset. Acts is introduced as a preeminently theocentric narrative, as evidenced by the emphasis on the Father and his eschatological purpose, the centrality of the work of the Spirit in the ministry of Jesus and the prosperous ministry of the disciples, the presence of heavenly messengers as Jesus' ascension, and the echoes of Scripture bring witness to God's design in this section. A pivotal role will be played by the Holy Spirit as the muscle of the church's mission. The ascension signifies the elevated status of Jesus, whose ministry and message was vindicated by God and serves as a guarantee of Jesus' return. And finally, this opening section of Acts underscores the importance of service as witnesses and the universality of the prospective mission, together with the related pragmatic place of Israel as a people in God's redemptive plan.